Well, hello and welcome to this extra special session of ExecuNet Masterclass. I'm your host, as always, Tony Vlahos. Many forms of bias in hiring persist in companies of all sizes. The critical question isn't, is there age bias or gender bias or some other form of bias, but how do I overcome it so that you can stand out from the resume pile for all the right reasons and land the role you want as quickly as possible? So for answers, I brought together three leading experts in the executive job search space, whom you'll meet in just a moment. Over the next hour, this crackerjack team will also tell you how to explain employment gaps and other mysteries that could trip you up. And today's talk is a part of our daily commitment here at ExecuNet to connect you with trusted advisors who can help you create the transformative results you want in your career, in the world of work, and of course, in your everyday life. So real quick, the format for today's session, it'll be an advice-filled Q&A. You may, of course, chat in your questions, and I'll do my best to include them in our conversation. Some of you have emailed me some really great questions, and I thank you very much. I'll be asking those as well. Second, if you need technical support, you guessed it, chat it in, and my amazing colleague Kim will help you out. Finally, very important, please complete your evaluation form before you go. I know the panelists value your feedback, and Kim and I do too. It really does help us serve you better. Now, let me tell you a little about the people virtually seated right next to me. Don Weintraub is a renowned executive career coach with over 15 years of executive recruiting experience and many more years as a senior executive and hiring manager. He's a recognized expert in personal branding and marketing, networking, and interviewing. He's the managing director of the ExecuNet Career Services Group. Andrea Briscoe is an ExecuNet career strategist, diversity specialist, professor, and career coach with expertise in helping executives create an impactful resume and interview with skill and ease. She has served as a corporate human resource partner and consultant for many elite firms, including KPMG, the American Institute of CPAs, Guardian Insurance, and Merrill Lynch. Last but not least, Sandra Botts is a career strategist with ExecuNet as well. She uses the insider information gained from her prior experience in retained and contingency executive search to assist executives in career transition. With that, Sandra, Don, and Andrea, welcome. It's good to be talking to you.
Welcome.
Thank you,
Thank
Tony.
you.
All right, so we're going to dive into ageism and other forms of bias in a second. But before we do, I know Don has got some opening remarks he'd like to make, and let's all listen in and hear what Don has to say. Don, go for it.
Thank you, Tony. This is a topic that comes up all the time. And I've been taking your calls for the past 9 years here at ExecuNet. And so I've heard the issues many times over. When it comes to age, I was thinking in preparation for this session, the irony of the fact that as of this moment, the three top candidates for president, if you were to look at the polls, are all over 70 years old. And yet, assuming one of them is elected president in 2020, we'll be turning over the running of the country to somebody probably older than any of you on this call who are worried about ageism in terms of being hired. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have Mayor Pete, who's in his 30s. And the question is he too young to run the country? And so we've got the two extremes of ageism playing out in political life as those of us on the call worry about whether or not that's going to be one of the things to get in our way. And so the broader thing I just wanted to mention to you prior to the call starting is that, there's an old saying, it's not paranoia if you're really being followed. And yes, ageism is alive and well. By the same token, if you believe that the only reason you're not getting the job is because you're too young, you're too old, you're too white, you're too black, you're disabled, go down the list of things that people tell us, then I think you may be missing the major point. It may have nothing to do with any of these areas. They may just be a convenient excuse for you. And part of why we're together today is really to discuss this and to see which of these things is real and which perhaps isn't. I'll add just one thing because it came to me yesterday. This article that I saw from Fast Company, written by a guy by the name of Chip Conley, and I was surprised, and you may be too, that the fastest growing age demographic of employees in the workforce as of today are those 65 and older. That is a 35% jump in the past half decade. So obviously someone other than McDonald's and Walmart are hiring senior folks. And so the purpose of today's session is to sort through the realities and where it is real, the strategies for helping you deal with some of these issues. And that's what my team and I do on a daily basis here at ExecuNet. So take advantage of today and take advantage, if you choose, to have us speak with you one-on-one down the road. So thank you, Tony.
Well, thanks for setting up that way. And we'll be chatting out some information for those of you who are interested in connecting individually with not just the team in front of you that you'll learn so much from the next hour, but really a full complement of talented people who are leading experts in this space. And we'll prove that to you over the next hour, should there be any doubt. So we're getting lots of chats already, gang, from people with questions about ageism and employment gaps or stints at companies that are far too long. We're going to dive into all of those in turn. But I wanted to start in a more general place, if I may, and ask, I guess I'll ask Andrea, how can you tell if you're a victim of some form of bias, say in an interview or before you even get to the interview? It's one of these things that often we tell ourselves, but how can you tell if you're in fact in that situation? What are some of the signs that you've noticed in your career, both as a lawyer, but also as a strategist?
Well, I think that's a great question. And, I'll give a nice lawyerly answer, which is it depends. Because, I think that in terms of being discriminated against or any form of bias that is kind of inflicted upon any of us, it's hard to tell. So people will go, for example, in the ExecuNet groups that we do and talk to members, they'll say, oh, I haven't heard back. My resume's fallen into a black hole and I don't know what happened. It's probably because I'm 53.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, that's a valid concern, but I think that it's hard to tell if you're not on the other side of that, knowing what's in the mind of someone else. So we don't know what's in the mind of someone else. I think that what we can change, coach around and engage with folks about is how do you react to what's going on with you and how do you create the circumstance where this isn't going to occur. So if you showed up at an interview or was part of a phone screen and said things like, oh, I've got shoes older than you, like that's not going to bode well with the person who's on the receiving end of that. I mean, I had, we do these wonderful resume reviews, talking with people about their collateral. And, I had a fellow who happened to be an African-American guy say to me, I don't have a picture on LinkedIn because I feel like people will discriminate against me based on the fact that I'm African-American. And I said, well, then how will you show up at the company? Right? Because you're going to have to show up in the space being who you are, being 31 and too young or being 73. So, so the idea again is to create the circumstance where you can be successful. Is it a company that's looking for somebody with my breadth of experience? Do I have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to move forward in the career? And most importantly, am I showcasing those things in a way that's appropriate? Am I showcasing that through, a resume that is working well for me, that leverages your skills and abilities? So it's kind of what are you pushing out there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
And Andrea has begun to sketch out the question I had for Sandra, which is, again, in broad terms, before we get into specific areas of bias and career gaps and so on, if you were, Sandra, to state just a fundamental strategy that an executive in search must employ to come out on top when they're facing real or perceived bias, such as ageism, what are some of the core tenets of your philosophy, if you will, that they need to keep in mind as they march forward and beat out the competition for that job?
Well, I think that, believe it or not, I think our new economy that we're in has a lot going for us in that scenario. I'm not sure if you've probably seen the numbers for 2018, but the average executive role is only 18 months now. And when companies are hiring at that level, they're hiring to solve a problem. They're not looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right. Most of the time, they're looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right now. And I know in years past, I've been headhunting for 20 years, and there were times when I would get more questions about, well, where's this person going to be in 5 years? This person's 5 years away from retirement. Where are they going to be? How much of an investment is that for us? I don't see many companies thinking like that anymore. They're thinking, can this person help me get from point A to point B, or A through Z, whatever that particular stage is with the company. So from the candidate or job seeker perspective, they need to lead with the actual benefit that they provide, not so much their skills and experience, not leading with, I have 25, 30 years of experience. That doesn't mean anything in our economy these days. It's not what your time spent is, it's what your time spent actually equals and how it benefits them. So if they can come to the table with a compelling story about the problem that they solve, more and more in our disruptive economy, we're seeing companies being less worried about what sort of background that is, but rather, can they help me? And I think, in a self-absorbed sort of way, what's in it for me is working to the candidate's advantage if they learn how to market and tell their story in that way.
Mhm. Well said. So, Don, back to you. There's a form of bias that often goes undiscussed, and we would be remiss not to talk about it. It's not age, it's not gender, it's not race, it's not political leanings. It's employers' discrimination against the unemployed, and we haven't really encapsulated that in our planned conversation, but it was chatted in. It's been on my mind, and I wonder if I could ask you, how do we fix that? If I'm out of a job and looking for a job, and I perceive that I'm discriminated against simply because I have no job and want one, what do you say to that candidate?
There was a study done a couple of years ago by Northeastern University that actually documented the discrimination against the unemployed. And the longer you're unemployed, and 6 months was the key factor, if you're unemployed for more than 6 months and that's showing up in your materials, there are companies that will just not talk to you. So how do you mitigate for that? Because most of what we're talking about today are strategies for mitigating. Because lying is one, we don't recommend that, okay? But creating gap fillers is certainly something we do recommend. Not showing an extended period of unemployment, but showing something that you're actually involved in during that period of time. So what are the things that we recommend? If you're going back to school and taking a course, if you're volunteering, if you're doing some consulting work. Now, consulting can certainly be an illusion. What I recommended to somebody just this week in a resume review that we did was, speak with 3 or 4 of your closest friends. Ask them if you can do some work for them in exchange, and you won't charge them, in exchange for being able to list them as clients under this newly formed consulting firm that you're now running. At least then you've got something to fill the gap that is truthful. You don't have to say whether you're charging or not charging for your advice. But the gap itself is problematic. And so I think going out of your way to fill the gap is something we would strongly recommend.
Mhm. All right. Thank you, Don. Let's dive into ageism. And I'm going to start with a note written to me a week or so ago by a CFO from Dallas. And he writes, "Hey, Tony, great start. It appears to me that when I have qualified to move on to round two of the interview process, I find myself to be one of three final candidate selections most every time. So far, so good, right? Well, here's the thing. I am what they called seasoned. I have great experience in my industry, which unfortunately for me gives away my age. I'm in my late 50s. I'm competing against a much younger crop of executives who are in their 30s and 40s. How do I keep my momentum going to land a new role at my quote late stage and not think of this process as age discrimination? Thanks from Dallas, Mitch." So let's help out Mitch. Sandra, it's a familiar, heartbreaking tale. Talented senior level exec feels pushed out of the running simply because of their age. Film at 11, right? What is some general advice you could offer Mitch?
Well, this is a little ironic because, my 20 years of headhunting is spent in accounting and finance. And I distinctly remember a CFO search that I was working on where there were two final candidates for this search. And it happened to be with a company that was not a startup, but it was a tech that had some legs on it and had a lot of, the management team, a lot of them were wearing hoodies. Okay. And the two people in the final round of interviews for the CFO both had gray hair. One was actually older than the other. Um, the one that actually got the job was the older one. But interestingly enough, the one that was younger, and I think it was like 5 years, was claiming that it was age discrimination that he did not get the job. Of course, I could not tell him that it was the older gentleman that got the job. But it's funny because the older gentleman never brought up age once. I can tell you his attitude was completely different about it. He was so excited to be working with this new technology. He was so excited to be around people who had so many fresh ideas and who thought like he did. Um, and it taught me an early lesson that it's a lot to do with your mentality. One of the things that I try and coach people to do when they're going into these interviews is to really talk about being pro change and talk about, if you've been with one company for a long time, talk about all the pivots that you managed and all the different ups and downs in the market where you helped the company turn on a dime. Pivots, change in technology, new markets, all this stuff are hot buttons that companies actually like to have some experience for, believe it or not. But saying things like you mentioned before, Don, about I got shoes older than you, or saying I'm not into this LinkedIn thing, I'm not social media. Or I've actually done resume reviews with people who actually start their resume out with the word seasoned. Don't use that. Don't lean on your years of experience. Talk about the amazing pivots and change management and new technology. And it's funny because I'm not saying ageism doesn't exist because I'm 53 myself, and I went through my own job search sensitivity training, and I was perfectly qualified for a high tech company that I actually did not get the job at, but I didn't necessarily claim that it was ageism. But the more mentality that you have, and yeah, there's going to be a little pushback in the beginning at times because our brains have 30 thoughts per second. And what we do with that, we don't process them individually because we're not computers. We build stories with them. And so there are automatic stories and stereotypes that we've built, and we do that to survive so we can get out of the driveway in less than 30 minutes in the morning, right? But if we take a second, we can actually easily pivot those mentalities. How many times have you talked to somebody and had one thought about them, and after 3 seconds of talking to them, been completely elated of how they've changed your mind about who they were and who you thought they were? And that's the onus on the candidate.
Absolutely. All right. You mentioned technology, Sandra. I want to turn to Andrea for a moment. How do you demonstrate your fluency with technology, say in your marketing collateral? and at an interview without looking like you're trying too hard to be, hip to the latest cool things. It could come off as inauthentic, but you also want to demonstrate your relevance. How do you navigate that sometimes treacherous terrain?
Well, I think that kind of to piggyback on what Sandra has just said, it's about being perceived and being, in fact, an innovator. What are the things that you've used? What are the systems that you've used in order to kind of innovate or even just keep up? And I think that that's the environment that we're in, that we're asking people to continuously be aware, be abreast, and keep up with what's going on. I don't think that it's necessarily creating an image that doesn't exist, where I'm hip and up to date, Tony, as you say, because in some ways, thinking about it in that mindset creates an opportunity to say that I'm not that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like if I've got to
Yes.
come and tell you that I'm hip and I'm cutting edge, then maybe you aren't. So it's kind of what works well for you in terms of what can you master that's going to make your life easier, and being open to learning, because I think the idea of being an innovator or even sort of disrupting the way that you would naturally think about things opens a pathway for you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if LinkedIn is not your thing, then learn more about it. Like how can it change the game for you? Because typically, people who aren't active on LinkedIn and who haven't used it will think of it in the same way that they think about like a Facebook. And I spend a lot of time telling people that it's not a Facebook. It's not Facebook for business.
Right.
It's a platform that allows you to network effectively and efficiently and be fluid in what you're doing, where your resume is somewhat more of a stagnant tool that you use. You can change your LinkedIn continuously if you have the right support
Mm-hmm.
to get there. So
Awesome. So let's pull back the lens and Don, with your help, focus on the things that executives in search do to get noticed so they can get the interview. Resume leaps to mind. Andrea mentioned their LinkedIn profile. What are some quick do's and maybe some don'ts that an older worker should think about and implement as they are seeking to get noticed for the job they want?
Okay, so Sandra mentioned the word seasoned, and I always ask folks who use that, whether it's garlic, paprika, or
I
something
had a
else.
feeling you're going to go there.
yeah, I do that.
Well, but that's
Ooh, a
what
stick.
season means to me. I
Mhm.
think of a turkey at Thanksgiving when I think about seasoned. So it's little things like that, or still having an AOL account, that are dead giveaways that you're no longer 33 years old. But um, sometimes it's far more subtle than that. Um, it's what's going on in your own head that often is what gets in your way. For example, all three of us do resume reviews on an ongoing basis. And we always ask the member why we're on the call with them, what they're hoping to accomplish, what kind of issues or obstacles they're running into. And a common response is, oh, I send my resume in and I don't get a response back. It must be because I'm too old. Or it must be because you fill in the blank. I'm too something. And I say to them, have you ever heard of an applicant tracking system? And they say, well, yeah, but I'm not sure what that is. And so we explain to them that most companies have a piece of software that does the initial screening of an individual, and that software is looking for keywords and the right keywords, not 8-word keywords, 1 or 2 word keywords that are likely to be put into the job search and matched up with resumes. And then they don't think their resume is the problem. They don't think that it's software that's eliminating them from consideration. They think it's something else that they've created in their own mind as the obstacle. So sometimes, by literally pointing out to them how out of date their collateral is, how damaging it is, whether they're using certain language, whether they're not focusing in on accomplishments, whether they're using a black and white document. I got one this week that was 12 pages long. Swear to God, 12 pages long. I mean, that in and by itself, if I were a hiring manager, would I speak to someone who sent me a 12-page resume? No, but it would have nothing to do with their age or anything else. It would simply be that they didn't know how to market themselves. This is a marketing and sales process. Your resume, your LinkedIn profile are pieces of marketing collateral. Look at yours, compare it to the company you last worked for or currently work for, and say to yourself, does mine look anything like this company's marketing material? Does theirs have color? Does mine? Does theirs have graphics and pictures? Not my resume, but other pieces of collateral. Does mine have something other than pure words? It's all about how to go to market. That's what we're really talking about. Right. Tony, you're a marketing guy. You understand this. A lot of people we talk to aren't, or even if they are, they don't apply it to themselves.
Right.
So think about this through a marketing lens. And then when we talk about interviewing, if we do, think about that as a competition, like a sales call, trying to win the business, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to win the business, in this case, the job. Mm-hmm. And are you competing in a way that will help you to be successful, or are you competing in a way you did 20 years ago?
Terrific. All right. Sandra, back to you. And so much of what we're talking about clearly is about getting ahead of objections, right? So let's fast forward to the time when Mitch is at the interview and he's facing one of your favorite questions. So tell me about yourself. What should he be ready to say? Thinking, of course, about his relevance to the role in the company and not so much the fact that he's whatever he said he was, late 50s. So tell me about yourself. How should he approach that one?
That question's interesting to me because it's not so much a they're not trying to catch you. This is not a gotcha question. It's more of an icebreaker question where somebody really wants to understand how they can connect with a person. But at the same time, it can make or break you. So two things you don't want to do. You don't want to give them a dissertation of what's on your resume, and you don't want to give them a, child since I was a child. What you want to do is you want to align who you are with a person as a person and how it relates to what it is that you do for a living and how that relates to how you can benefit them. So you're always, everything that comes out of in all of your communication, whether it's your collateral or whether it's your story, you have to align it with what they want and what's in it for them is. So like I said, I've always dealt with, a lot of accounting and finance people. And some of the common, most successful conversations that come out of that are, look, I've always known that I liked numbers since I was younger. And when I went to school and realized I could actually use numbers to help solve business problems, that was really exciting for me. And then I had the opportunity when I was working at, XYZ company, we did a couple really interesting things and I realized how powerful this ability was. And it really got me more excited to, figure out how we could identify new opportunities by coming up with better long-term strategies on where we were as a company. And when I saw that that's part of what you're looking for, that got me really excited, and I've been excited about this interview ever since. And so now you're taking your story and you're being authentic about who you are. And that authenticity is very important, because if you just make up words, it's not going to come through. lining it up with what it is that they want to do. So they're thinking, wow, this person is the perfect fit. And that's the type of conversation that melts away any preconceived notions that they might have had about you when they walked in the door based on whatever ism that you're worried about. You're now connecting them with who you are as a person. And that's, again, the onus is on you to do that.
Right, terrific. Um, Andrea, if you are over a certain age, are there companies you should be thinking about that maybe expressly hire people who are of a certain age? We mentioned that Mitch is after a job with a startup, but is there a strategic vision there that an older worker might want to embrace as they think about what lies ahead for them?
I think that's an interesting question. If there are companies like that, other than what comes to top of mind, which is kind of the tongue-in-cheek, like greeter type of roles, I think that roles for senior people really just depend on who they are and how they show up. Not so much that there's a company that has a particular um, I guess, initiative to hire people of a certain age, because I think that also goes to the opposite way of thinking about it, right? Like, oh, I feel like there's some sort of bias. So now there's a focused hiring push from certain organizations to hire particular people. I think it's, again, the concept of being open to opportunities, being flexible, not going in with a preconceived notion of, they're not going to hire me because I'm too young, too old, to whatever the choice is there. And it's being open to the opportunity. And also, a broader question for me around all of this stuff really is that I wanted to touch on is that, any sort of ism is somewhat outside of the candidate's control. So if you're being discriminated against based on whatever that is, you want to work in the realm of the things that you can control. So those are, what does your collateral look like? What is your, elevator pitch value proposition? As Sandra and Don have both said, who you are and what you do and how that is leveraged, as opposed to what are all the possible things that can fall upon me as somebody who's 27 looking for a senior role, or someone who's 67 looking for a senior role. It's more about how you show up as an individual, and that you have the right tools to market yourself effectively and efficiently, I think.
Right. Well said. We're going to move on to questions about race and gender bias. Later on, we are totally going to get to employment gaps. So many of you have got those questions. Stick around for it. I know Kim is going to chat out. She hasn't already. I can't see it on my screen. An invitation to connect with Don or Sandra or Andrea or any of the other amazing strategists that are part of our team here at ExecuNet. I'm going to urge all of you who are looking for work and facing these questions and not really understanding what to do as you move forward to take advantage of that opportunity to connect with them. There's no charge to you for this diagnostic session where in the course of an hour, one of these amazing people will help you figure out how to move forward from where you are and get you on the fast track to getting where you want to get. So if you haven't seen that link yet, you will. If you have, please click on it. Let us know who you are, and we'd love to talk to you. So we're going to move on to race and hiring. And
Tony,
please,
before you do, I'm
yes,
sorry. Can I just double back for 1 second?
absolutely.
Thank you, Tony. I think from the feedback we've received over the years, one of the most valuable services we provide is around the answer to the question, so tell me about yourself. Okay? Why? Because you're brought in for an interview largely on the basis of what's in your resume. You're hired largely on the basis of fit, who you are and how well you fit with the person who's interviewing you. And fit is being able to tell the story about yourself. And so when we put these together for members in 2 coaching modules called the You and Value Conversation, we do tell a story, and we do go back often to the early years, and to include up to date, outside of work, and everything in between. And the person is coached on it and prepares and shares it and gets critiqued on it. And I don't know if the guy I'm going to be talking to in just about an hour is on this call, but he would tell you that after he was prepared, he went in for an interview, and the first question he was asked was, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." And he was amazed that he actually was prepared to answer the question that came up during our coaching. So I just wanted to mention that specifically. And then the other thing, the Boston Globe publishes annually the best companies to work for in Massachusetts and the nearby area. It does it for large companies, medium-sized companies, small companies. If you're worried about being discriminated against, and if you lived in this area, probably one of the best companies to go after would be one of these 100 companies, because the logic would say they're probably the ones that are most open to folks who would otherwise feel like it would be difficult to get a job. I don't know if in your communities such lists are published, but finding the quote unquote best companies to work for is always a strategy I recommend when you're having trouble finding the right company to work for.
Good
Okay?
advice.
So thank you for letting me interrupt.
Anytime. All right, let's get on to diversity, race. Andrea, I want to cycle back to you because you gave us the example of the gentleman who didn't want to post a profile picture for fear of being discriminated against. And your advice, of course, as well, they'll see you when you show up anyway. I'm saying it in my own words, but help us understand this a little bit more. And I'm going to draw your attention to the resume. And we read about stories of minorities who, quote, whiten up their resume so that they don't experience discrimination before anyone actually meets them. What is our view of this? What is some of the danger, and is there any elegant way to do this that doesn't sound like what I just said?
Okay, so um, I've never heard of that before.
Okay.
Doing that to your resume, it leads me to research around how people's names are equated to particular races and how that impacts people. Should you change your name to be more accepted by what is the dominant culture? I think again, Tony, you're sending me some really interesting questions that could probably spend a lot of time discussing. But my personal opinion, and I'm happy to pitch it over to the rest of the panelists here and thinking about that, is that you are who you are, and that's who you need to show up as. So if it's something that might be easier to pronounce, then that's a question that you might want to think about in terms of how your document looks that might identify you with something that's going to not be useful to you. But I would say that for me, I would personally not change anything about the who that I am in order to land a job. And I would think that I know some people who have very long names may use their initials at the beginning of their name, et cetera, to make that easier, more palatable. But I really think that doing some sort of wholesale change in order to land a job is not a place where you will be ultimately happy in the long term. And I think the thing is that is also true of the guy who doesn't want to put his picture up, or any of the people who change in order for to be accepted. And I think the trend in this country is lots of awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or equity in action, or inclusiveness. And so I think that to Don's point around best places to work, I think that that's a tender place for a lot of organizations, that we have to do something differently in order to bring people into the organization. So that's a point of awareness. And I don't think that changing your name or any characteristics about you in order to land a job is going to be helpful in that place.
And maybe not as severe as changing a name, but a few examples that leap to mind include, well, I have certain affiliations, I belong to certain clubs, I'm part of certain organizations, which suggest something to a potential hiring manager. So I guess what's our message there, that if it's a story of value and contribution, then tell that story and don't worry about what you might be putting out there when you state my associations are X, Y, and Z. Is that our advice?
But Tony, it's going to be about fit, and fit goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you put your political affiliations and then feel you're being discriminated against, or you put your political affiliations and then get hired by somebody who shares those affiliations, it can work for you, it can work against you.
Right.
Now, whether you should put them in or not, be neutral, that's one strategy. To declare who you are if you strongly believe in it, that's another strategy. Because would you really want to be in a quote unquote relationship, whether it's a job, a physical relationship with someone, who doesn't believe the same things you do, isn't aligned with you? Would you not be miserable day in and day out? So maybe the strategy is, here's who I am, and therefore if somebody reaches out to you, you have a pretty good sense, they probably are like-minded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could take that strategy either way.
Okay. You mentioned fit. I had a email from an executive a week ago who raised that question, and it went like this: can hiring for fit actually decrease diversity? Interesting thought. What's your sense of that, Don?
I never thought of it in that way. Yeah, it could.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. If fit is about sharing common values, about sharing common interests, sharing common upbringing, having gone to the same school, that can work any which way. But ultimately, if the fit doesn't exist, if there isn't honesty on the part of both parties, the likelihood is far greater that if the hiring decision gets made, somebody's going to be unhappy on the job. And so my belief is, be honest, be transparent as either the candidate or somebody who has run 4 companies and has hired hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, including Andrea and Sandra. I always look for fit when I bring people in. I'm looking for like-minded people. Otherwise, I'm making myself miserable. And I can do that on my own. I don't need people to help me with that.
I can add to that, Tony.
Please.
I have an experience with that. Somebody that I've known for many, many years, worked with for many, many years. As a hiring manager, he actually experienced that. He was trying to hire some people for his team within his organization. And he was having trouble with HR screening them because HR was screening a lot of the best people out. And the HR response was, well, they're not one of us. And they meant that in sort of a fit mentality sort of way. And there actually has been a lot of discussion and a lot of articles and a lot of thought leaders talking about how companies are trying to find this fit and they're ending up being very monochromatic, and that's actually, and I believe it was the Harvard Business Review actually stating that that's not the best avenue for the company. So what ended up happening was that person, that hiring manager, was so unhappy with the way the fit was working in that company with that mentality, he left. And that organization actually lost him. And that organization actually is struggling with keeping that whole program afloat now. And so they're suffering for it. But let's go back to the point that Andrea said, which is you can only control what you can control.
Yes.
And when you are authentic about who you are, the right pieces will fall into place. The problem arises that when you don't do some of the other things right that you do have control over, but you're not doing, such as making sure that your story is right, your story is authentic to bringing all your experience together, and how you're represented when you're not in the room with the collateral, and all the little things that can help you, can let you fall through the cracks. When you don't do those things and focus your energy too much on the things that you don't have control, you tend to feel a little bit more desperate, call excuses out, or look for ways that you can cast a wider net. And what happens is when you cast a wider net, you pull up a lot of junk. When you focus on the things that you can control and fish with the right bait in the right waters, you'll end up with something that's right for you. And that's where we have to focus on being authentic to who we are, controlling what we can control, and allowing whatever corporate decisions, right or wrong, a company is going to make as their decision. And maybe it ends up being not your circus, not your monkeys, and you're all the better for it.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to quickly move through gender bias and pregnancy as well. And I want to then, of course, spend the remainder of our time on that all important challenge of career gaps. So, sticking with you on Sandra, I'm sorry, when we're thinking about common gender biases that occur, say, in job interviews, what are we talking about? What are some of the things that executives who are in leadership roles who are women commonly face that, again, getting ahead of those objections and telling your value story, what should they be prepared for at that interview?
Again, this is something beyond our control. To be quite honest with you, I have not really run into situations of gender bias in a long time. I think it was more prominent before. And I think now, like Andrea said, we have so much more awareness of what diversity of everyone brings to the table. But I can tell you, I wrote an interesting blog probably about 4 or 5 years ago on that topic. I did an event for CFOs, and I was living in the Boston area, and I sent out an invitation to all the CFOs in the area. And I think there were like, I don't know, 200 that I had invited. And I think there were only 4 female CFOs in that mailing. And I had to really dig down and figure out why is that? And when I really started doing the research to why some people will get these positions at the top and others won't, what I found to be the major objective obstacle, and looking at these people that did get the roles and how they got them, is that the men actually spent more time in their career building alliances and networking, as where the women were spending more time really just getting to work and doing the job. They had a family at home they had to take care of. They didn't have time to be messing around, going off and playing golf. They weren't going out to lunch with their colleagues. They were just, grabbing a tea out of the, a tea bag out of the break room and running back. And that's why I called the blog Tea Time versus Tea Time. And I found that there's definitely more of an ease for people to transition from corporate role to corporate role if they have spent their time in their career building alliances. And I just don't think that even for me that as females that we've spent enough time or put enough importance on going out and building relationships and treating our career more like a lone wolf. And that's just been my experience.
Okay. Any other thoughts on gender bias, whether it's something that is experienced at the interview table, or any advice on if anything needs to change in a resume to overcome some perceived biases? For example, there are biases about emotional control. There are stereotypes about parenting responsibilities or plans or assertiveness and leadership abilities. These are things that people carry forward with them. And how do you, if you're a female executive who wants a new role, overcome those? I guess is still on my mind. Any final thoughts on those or any of those points?
I just agree with Sandra. I think
Okay.
it used to be far more prevalent
Mm-hmm.
than it is today. And so um, I want to dismiss it as there is none. But look at look at the candidates who are currently running for president and look at the diversity in the group, at least on the Democratic side at the moment, because that's the challenger side. And you've got the best representation of all diversity areas, whether it's gender, it's race, it's religion, it's whatever. I think we're seeing a breakthrough in that, unlike 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the career gaps. I'm not getting any chats from our listeners around what to do when you're pregnant and interviewing or in search. If there are any, chat those in. But I'm going to move on to career gaps because it's a whole other area. So I'm going to read a letter that I got from someone named Janet. Dearest Tony, I already love Janet. I'm not getting interviews. I can't figure out what the problem is. When I was laid off in January, in addition to the usual concerns like how quickly will I find a new job and how will I pay the mortgage, I also worried about having yet another employment gap on my resume. I'd taken a time out from my career to raise my kids, so I already had a Grand Canyon-sized gaping hole on my CV. I'm afraid that with this layoff, employers will get the impression I'm taking more breaks in an aging rock band. Bless you, Janet. Other than the gaps, my resume is fine. I've laid out all of my qualifications, all my work experience and past responsibilities, and of course, all my degrees. Anyone got any advice for me? Signed, Janet. Okay, thank you, Janet, wherever you are. Sandra, are employers leery of hiring candidates with a history of job hopping? Let's start there, and then we'll get to some of the gaps. Let's start with job hopping, especially if you're an older worker, you've done a lot of things, or you're in a functional area that the lifespan of a CMO is like what, a little greater than the average hair, I guess. But it is an area where you tend to job hop a lot. Is there a bias against that, and how do you tell that story in your collateral?
Well, I think anybody that has a bias against job hopping in today's disruptive economy, the companies at least are very old school. So you might want to think about that. Our whole disruptive world works now that, first of all, companies pivot. So things are going to change. They're going to get rid of a division, and people just move on. And this all started with the '08 recession. And matter of fact, the millennials that came into the workforce at that time, they realized that that was how companies worked, and they realized that B, they also had to take the onus on themselves to keep themselves marketable. And so if they weren't getting certain experience at one company, they had to go get that at the other company because they had to stay marketable, because there's no, a company's just going to keep you because you've got seniority, like there was in pre-recession. Right now, companies make decisions for fiscal reasons. So that mentality had to go back to the candidate too, to say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get the experience that I need to get. And so that mentality has been going forward now. And because companies have to pivot and people have to pivot, there's not really, they don't see that as being so much of a negative as they can see it as a positive, and that you bring this different experience to the table. But if you yourself don't see it as a positive and make it part of your story and weave it into how it all benefits them, they're not going to see it that way either.
Mm-hmm. We all forget.
Picking up on that, it's just storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
The resume is about storytelling. And if there are reasons, there have been reductions in force outside your control, tell the reader. Otherwise, as a former recruiter, I will fill in the gaps. And it will be far worse than any reality. And the flip side of job hopping is those people who have spent 25 years in the same company. Mm-hmm. So if there are any kind of issues, it's at the extremes. Even if you've had 10 jobs in the same company over 25 years, oh, they only worked in one place. Oh, this person has had 5 jobs in 10 years. If that's what's in the mind of the recruiter or the hiring manager, you have no control over that. All you can do is tell the story in a way that mitigates wherever possible for them thinking, oh, he was fired with cause. Explain why you had to move. Explain the opportunity you went to and why that was worth making a move. Don't leave it to chance that somebody can fill in the blanks and do it to your advantage.
Okay. On
So
that topic
I'd
of,
like to add one quick thing
please
to
do, yes.
back on what my panel members have also said here. And it's about also approaching your responses with the same level of sort of ingenuity and fresh thinking, because if you're going to respond to a question out of, oh, well, I've got gaps, so that's a danger, and you're responding to it as if it's a deficit, then it can also be perceived as a deficit in that way. So thinking about it as, maybe I was brought in to do the following things and I've accomplished those things. So now I'm looking for the next opportunity to do that. So it is certainly storytelling, but it's also you having the mindset that you have and to whom you're speaking about that as well. And also just, from a legal perspective, asking people about their last salary, asking people about why they left, those kinds of questions are still asked, right? Like, we always advise people in HR who are doing reference checks, get as much information as you can. But if you're in HR and you're responding, you give name, rank, serial number. What was the position? What was their salary? I can confirm length of employment, right? So it goes both ways, but I think that those are some really important considerations.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about the collateral that gets you noticed, all right? I get these questions a lot, and in fact, they were chatted in today as well. The chronological resume versus the functional resume, as that relates to.
Chronological is the answer. It's a
Okay,
simple answer.
all right. Thanks for answering it. On we go. The cover letter, is that a place to tell your story of your gap, for example? How do you use that piece of collateral as part of your marketing? Don, I'm staring right at you. We can stay with you.
Yeah, I can see that. Potentially, yes. You just don't know whether or not the cover letter will even be read. So make sure that you explain it in the resume as well. Often the resume gets circulated without the cover letter, in which case you want to make sure if it's important, it's in both documents.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about the role of the LinkedIn profile, Sandra? The summary, is that a place to effectively tell a story that addresses career gaps or longevity in a particular organization? And how might you do that, knowing that, of course, is a general answer?
Well, the summary in a resume should be completely aligned with the benefit. I think it seems like a lot of the people who are writing in questions are really focused on how do I've got this negative thing. And the more you think and work with that negative thing, and while you do want it explained in your resume, like Don said, you want it, maybe put into the complexity statement that goes right after the title. If you the summary of a LinkedIn profile should really just focus on what you do for them and what position a company you help, what is the current state to future state that you take a company to. And so because people that are looking for talent and looking for executives, they don't necessarily know which background that they're looking for, they don't necessarily know what they don't want, and they don't necessarily know what they do want, as far as criteria goes. But what they know for sure is they know the problem that they have and what they want to accomplish in their company. And if you stay focused on that, everything else will just dissipate. And what you become focused on is what they will focus on. I had a candidate I had paired her up with an interview that I thought she would nail because the job and her and the company was a complete match. She went in, she did not get the interview. This happened twice. Finally, before the third one, I said, what are you thinking about before you go in there? And she said, well, I sit in the car and I go over the bullet points of the things that I don't have and how I'm going to respond to that. And I said, from now on, before you go in, I want you to think about what you do have and how you can help them, and how what a much better position they're going to be in when you get there. And she went in and she got that job.
Great story. All right. Anything else around career gaps or longevity or related issues that we haven't covered that going left to right, my left to your right, I guess, you want to address? So Don, anything we've overlooked that hasn't been chatted in that you would know about that we should talk about before we start to wrap up this hour?
No, I think we've covered the issue well, Tony. So thank you.
Okay, Sandra, anything left?
Yes, just focus on, claim who you are. Control the things that you can control. Don't worry about the things that you can't. Go extra and above on the things that you can control, and focus on just who you are and the benefit that you bring, and get that story straight.
Great. And Andrea?
Well, Sandra, you stole my thunder on those
Oh,
closing statements, but it's
I was
okay.
getting your vibe.
Yeah, yeah. So here's what I think about that. It's kind of what you focus on gets bigger. And in executive coaching, we talk about that a lot. If you spend a lot of time focusing on something, it's going to get bigger and be enhanced. So focus on what you can control. Focusing on, your messaging. What is your message? What is your special spice, if you will, that you bring to the arena, and whether that's in LinkedIn or whether that's in your resume, and move forward in that way. So staying, I think, positive.
I love that. Focus on, please say that again. That was awesome. Focus on
Part.
the part about what you focus on gets bigger. Did I
Well,
hear that right?
what you focus on gets bigger. We all know
Great.
that from waking up at 3 a.m, worrying, right? It just becomes overwhelming. So if you focus on the positivity, matching the value that you bring with the value of the organization, that's the focus. That's the shift.
So
Terrific.
Tony, I want to retract my earlier statement. I do want to say something
About pregnancy or what? Okay.
about pregnancy,
Okay.
pregnant pause. Mine was a pregnant pause. Yes, it was. Um, One of the advantages, the three of us, and there's a team of 30 people, um, that strategists that take calls with you guys who are on this masterclass with us. And the fact that we don't know you, we come in with no preconceived notions, we're objective, we're very experienced helping others, allows us to approach you and share with you what we see as the real obstacles, not the imagined obstacles, for you getting a job more quickly and more successfully. So take advantage of our objective feedback that we can provide you, because it may very well make the difference between you landing a job soon or it's suddenly September and you're still unemployed.
Right. Thanks for that perspective, Don. Well, thank you all. I'm going to wrap this up. We covered a lot of territory, and I know there are a lot of questions that were fired in that I could not get to. I apologize for that. But this final slide again amplifies what Don said and what I said earlier and what our colleague Kim chatted to earlier. Take full advantage of us, please. Follow that link. If there are questions that have now occurred to you or things that have been on your mind for a while, and you'd love that definitive, trusted answer from people who really know, then follow that link and ask those questions. And you can do it in a one-on-one diagnostic session where you learn about what's in your way and how to get ahead of those objections and tell your story the right way to land as quickly as possible. So thank you all for your attention. That's my most precious resource. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Andrea. I look forward to seeing everyone at the next session of ExecuNet Masterclass. Bye for now.